I've always felt stuck between two worlds. On the one side, my deep commitment to leftist politics, building collective power, dismantling oppressive systems. On the other, my absolute passion for inner work, trauma healing, embodiment, spirituality, and personal development. In leftist circles, the internal world is often dismissed as apolitical, self-indulgent, or even a tool of exploitation. Meanwhile, the internal world work often feels disconnected from systemic realities. It's as if we're forced to choose between two incomplete paths, structural change or personal transformation. But what if this is a false dichotomy? This video isn't a prescription or a manifesto, it's an invitation, a messy, incomplete attempt to explore how we might bridge these worlds. How can inner work serve collective liberation? How do we create movements that honor the inner work? What emerges when we refuse to separate the personal from the political, the internal from the external? For the revolution won't just happen out there in the streets on the front lines, it has to happen within us too. Poet and essayist Audre Lorde reminds us that
the true focus of revolutionary change is never merely the oppressive situations which we seek to escape, but that piece of the oppressor which is planted deep within each of us.
On the left, how often do we turn inwards to ask, what of these systems of oppression have taken root inside of me? The difficult truth is that no matter how ardently we may purport to reject these external systems, they worm their way into the deepest recesses of our subconscious, shaping our thought processes, worldviews, paradigms, and the way we see the world. When we don't do the work to root out our own colonization into white supremacist, patriarchal, cis-normative, capitalistic structures of consciousness, the ghosts and demons of our culture will continue to rear their ugly heads, such that we might succeed at tearing down external oppressive systems and step right into their shoes and become the thing we sought to destroy. As philosopher Robert Pirsig aptly wrote,
"If a factory is torn down, but the rationality that produced it is left standing, then that rationality will simply produce another factory. If a revolution destroys a government, but the patterns of thought that produced the government are left intact, then those patterns will repeat themselves."
I'm constantly noticing in myself racist, transphobic, fatphobic parts of me, and on a subtler level, how I adopt the politics I claim to oppose, the separation of nature and culture, good and evil, the spiritual and material, that humans are inherently selfish, a worldview of despair, that our efforts are useless, nothing will change. And it's not about self-flagellating ourselves for the pieces of the oppressor planted inside of us. In fact, battling against these parts usually only makes them stronger, creating more implicit racism, transphobia, fatphobia. Instead, it's an invitation with love, self-compassion, and accountability to self-investigate. I'm curious in what ways these systems are living within me. How did they get there? Where did they come from? How can I get to the root of this and heal this wounding? It's a lifetime pursuit for each of us to extract these distortions from ourselves. Just as 200 years ago, psychology didn't exist, and today a basic level of trauma consciousness is for many of us just a part of everyday experience. In the same way, I dream of a world where we can incorporate into common usage ways of making sense of systems of oppression and the ways they live within us, where commitment to a deliberate, sustained practice of extraction, interrogation, and healing is an essential part of what makes us human. The ultimate goal is to evoke a consciousness and cosmology alternative to the consciousness and cosmology of the systems planted within us. When we think of trauma, we usually imagine huge catastrophic events, but the truth is, trauma is much more common and everyday than we think. We live in a trauma-inducing world. Someone without trauma is the exception rather than the rule. Trauma often keeps us stuck reenacting and repeating traumatic events and relationships over and over again. Why couldn't I give myself safety and security? Because I didn't feel safety or security as a child. Why did I spend years neglecting my own welfare? Because neglect felt familiar. Why did I find it difficult to value myself as anything other than a sexual being? Because I'd been hypersexualized and sexually abused from a young age. And this reenactment doesn't just happen interpersonally, but also systemically. Why do we try so hard to please the daddy of capitalism, the daddy of the police? Because so many of us desperately wanted, but didn't receive, the love and approval of our own dads. Why do so many of us submit to the hierarchies of the workplace, class system, and state? Because many of us grew up in a dictatorship of the home. Why do we continue to treat people as disposable, to be locked away in prison? Because many of us have internalized a deeply shame-bound and punitive relationship to ourselves. As psychiatrist Carl Jung said,
"Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate."
Unfortunately, a lot of leftists bypass facing their internal world by focusing all their attention on how the systems suck. The general consensus tends to be that the world of mental health, trauma healing, and therapy individualizes problems that are systemic, gets us to accept unjust systems, and is deeply intertwined with the prison industrial complex. And whilst I think many of these criticisms are absolutely valid, I've made many of them myself on this channel, often we use these arguments as an excuse to numb, avoid, or escape our pain. Audre Lorde reflects,
I ask myself, do I ever use my war against racism to avoid other, even more unanswerable pain?
Ironically, political bypass doesn't just prevent inner knowing, it also doesn't serve the politics it purports to be about, because it leads us often to externalize, project outwards our own inner wounds onto our politics. Could our call-out culture and purity politics stem from unresolved feelings of inadequacy projected outwards as a demand for perfection from others? Could our constant infighting stem from a messiah complex, because to intellectually outmaneuver others makes us feel dominant, smart, superior? Could our class reductionism and lack of intersectionality stem from a sense of powerlessness, where we focus on the one way in which we are marginalized to validate our sense of victimhood? Environmentalist Charles Eisenstein cuts to the heart of this when he says,
Without deep work on yourself, how will you avoid recreating your own internalized oppression in all that you do? So often we see the same abuses of power, the same organizational dysfunctions among social change activists as we do in the institutions they seek to change. If these activists were to emerge victorious, why would we expect the society they create to be any different? Unless we have done transformational work on ourselves, we will remain products of the very civilization we seek to transform.
I used to feel so irritated with myself when I first started noticing my patterns. Why are you doing this again? But lately I've been feeling such a tenderness when I think of younger me. She was trying so hard. She had so much to learn. I like to imagine I'm holding her like the beautiful, unique being that she is. And I tell her, I know you're hurting, but you're safe now. I've got you. I'm flanking you. I'm attending to your healing. For me, this healing looks like taking a truthful, fearless inventory of my life, my wounds, my patterns, and their root systems. Practicing making amends and taking accountability so I don't project my inner wounds outwards, and learning to be the best steward to this being I can possibly be. There are so many different resources out there that can help us on this journey. I've personally found the Internal Family Systems Framework incredibly helpful. Our next Discord community book club call will be all about the founder's book, No Bad Parts. But ultimately, this isn't about attaining perfection or conforming to a wellness aesthetic. Sometimes I visualize a loving beam of light healing my abuser. Sometimes I visualize chopping off his testicles. Both have been equally therapeutic. There's no destination to get to. This is a life practice, a continuous journey of love, growth, and transformation. A way of relating to ourselves compassionately, tenderly, internally, and in turn to others externally. I would go as far as to say that one of our biggest problems on the left is our lack of embodiment. When we don't care for our bodies, we end up burnt out, hopeless, battle-weary. Stuck in our minds, we know how to intellectualize the world's problems, but we don't speak to the hearts and souls of people. We follow the party line, the blueprint, what we think we're supposed to be doing, rather than trusting the valuable guidance of our inner realm. Of course, there's absolutely a place for rationalizing, theorizing, and pushing our bodies beyond their limits. But for me personally, nothing has revolutionized my life and my relationship to politics as much as the simple tuning into my body and listening to the constant signals my body sends through gut feelings, sensation, emotion, energy, and the heart as an organ of perception. It's a moment-to-moment inventory, a deliberate, intentional scan. What body signals have I been overlooking? What is my body communicating to me? What mysteries am I discovering in myself? What curiosities, hunches, and signs are pulling at me? What do I, at my root, at my core, long for? How can I honor the messages of my body? Writer and poet Sonia Renee Taylor puts this so beautifully.
When you learn to listen to the subtle cues of your body, it will transform the entire direction of your existence. Your body is communicating things to you. It wants you to know. It's giving you information about misalignment. It's trying to put you on the right track. Your body is trying to get you aligned with your spirit.
And it's not about neglecting the mind in favor of the body, as the physician Gabor Mate wrote.
The intellect becomes a far more intelligent tool when it allows the heart to speak, when it opens itself to that within us that resonates with the truth, rather than trying to reason with it.
With our hearts as a guide and our minds as a curious, excited companion, we can build a healthy, grounded vessel through which to birth our work into the world. Our words and actions will be much more likely to penetrate, persuade, inspire, because we'll be speaking not as distanced, disembodied, dispassionate spectators, but with the full-bodied, ensouled, corporal, visceral, revolutionary spirit. There's less need to coerce or cajole ourselves into action because we'll be motivated and empowered from within, from a solid core sense of truth and internal thought of strength that can't so easily be shaken by external factors. We simply follow the call of our bones, the strange and mysterious instructions of our inner compass, trusting that we must go without necessarily knowing where we are going.
And I said to my body, softly, I want to be your friend. It took a long breath and replied, I have been waiting my whole life for this.
My relationship to the world of self-development as a tool to self-flagellate myself left me with a permanent resistance to anything smacking of self-help or self-care. If you've watched any of my videos on the topic, you'll know I'm very much in agreement with the classic leftist critiques of these subcultures as commodified, promoting narcissistic self-focus, an extension of neoliberalism, convincing people their problems are personal failings rather than the symptoms of a flawed system, and generally overly Americanized bullshit.
Do you have a gratitude journal?
Don't be absurd. I list the things I hate.
But the truth is, I think we sometimes throw the baby out with the bathwater with our wholesale rejection of these subcultures, because there's often a kernel of truth to the practices they promote that I personally have found incredibly helpful. For example, I personally love goal setting. I have personal goals like the inner work, trauma work, embodiment I've been talking about, and I have collective goals like refugee work in my area, a community app I'm trying to create, and these videos that I'm making. I found it impossible to stick to any of my goals until I came across the concept of the 12-week year, which is essentially about splitting your yearly goals into quarters and taking the advice of anti-self-help writer Oliver Berkman in 4,000 Weeks. I also like to focus on one goal at a time, rather than trying to do it all and never really getting anywhere with any of it. Focusing on one thing at a time means I actually achieve what I intend to. The book Atomic Habits has been vital and indispensable in helping me build strong habits. It offers practical, evidence-based advice on how to stick to your goals. For example, after reading that book, I got myself a habit tracker, and now every day I track my habits. One of these habits that I'm tracking is simply to write out what my goals actually are, just to remind myself of and reignite my commitment to what it is that I want to achieve. At the end of each week, I do a little weekly reset to reflect on the week that's gone by, to ask myself what's gone well, what could have gone better, what will I do differently this coming week. There's also a lot of mindset shifts that have changed my life, like the idea that if you optimize for fun, productivity will take care of itself, hence why I now refuse to do exercise I don't enjoy. I only do things that I actually love, like sports with my friends. Even like the concept of personal responsibility, not in the victim-blaming, pull yourself up by your bootstraps kind of way, but in the sense of finding a balance between understanding the systems that shape us and the responsibility we have over our lives, our choices, and our impacts. And I always adopt an attitude of radical abundance. Like, I really believe I will have the most radically revolutionary loves in my life, and I believe in a beautiful vision of the world we are going to bring about. My Patreon monthly videos are an outlet for the part of me deeply interested in self-development and internal work in general. Right now there's a whole backlog of videos you can go through if you're interested, where I discuss my reflections, my favourite questions, my goals. And I'm not the only one who likes this stuff. Some of the most ardent revolutionary leftists out there today have spoken about how they've taken a lot of wisdom from personal development. Rev Left Radio's Brett O'Shea has reclaimed the concept of discipline, usually associated with right-wing gym bros. He says few things are as satisfying as doing the things that terrify us. Neo-pagan theorist Starhawk practices visualizations and affirmations where she and her comrades will sing the names of
Harriet Tubman, woman of indomitable courage; John Muir, man who was not afraid to love nature; Isadora Duncan, who loved her body; Emma Goldman, fiery spirit.
Writers Adrienne Marie Brown and Sonia Renee Taylor created a whole self-care manual that I'm a huge fan of called Journal of Radical Permission, a daily guide for following your soul's calling. For me, this is all part of reclaiming territory. The right and liberals have long co-opted self-care and self-help for their own ends, but we don't need to cede ground to them. We can take it back and forge our own versions of revolutionary personal development rooted in collective and personal liberation. Because the point of our politics isn't to retreat into some niche subculture disconnected from the rest of society. It is to politicize previously depoliticized spaces, to weave politics into every aspect of our lives. On the left, spirituality has traditionally been understood as the opium of the masses, where the powers that be preach a nirvana, enlightenment, or God of the heavens only, whilst taking possession of the earth for themselves. My last video was exactly on this topic and made many of these very same critiques, and yet I think it would be arrogant to dismiss thousands of years of spiritual teachings altogether. I'm not an evangelist for any specific tradition. The unprecedented availability of different paths, practices, and resources offer something for everybody. What works for one person might not work for another. I tried a silent retreat once, never again, but I love to talk to trees. I like practicing mindfulness and meditation and tantra. I recently read that theorist Bell Hooks takes everything to the divine. Oh, you want me to write children's books? Okay then, I guess I'll do that. And so now I like to do something similar where I ask the highest voice of love, How can I be the best vessel for that which wants to be born through me to manifest? There are countless historical figures who used their deep commitment to spirituality in their political work in the world. In the Christian tradition alone, there's the civil rights icon Fannie Lou Hamer, who in the face of police terror, jail and beatings began to sing,
"Have a little talk with Jesus, this little light of mine,"
leading fellow prisoners into song.
when Paul and Silas were bound in jail.
Throughout her life, she continued to focus on issues like hunger and economic injustice, identifying her work as rooted in
Her identity as a Christian, which was formed, as she said, by being brought up in the church from an early age and being taught to love.
Jesus, a radical activist of his time, said the Lord appointed him
To let the oppressed go free.
He sat with prostitutes and lepers, keeping the company of the outcast and downtrodden, ministering to those in need. He exposed the hypocrisy and passivity of established religious leaders, destroyed property, partook in riots and social unrest, and said that it's
Easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God.
evoking spirit as inner strength. Etty Hillesum, a young Jewish woman killed in Auschwitz in 1943, addressed God repeatedly in her diaries, regarding him not as an external saviour, but as a power she could nurture and feed into herself. Could you imagine what we would all be capable of if we moved through the world with a sense of wonder and awe at divine creation, seeing the world as enchanted, bursting with meaning, all Earth's beings as alive and ensouled, this existence as a miracle, feeling a fundamental unity with all of life, calling on the power of the universe, God, Tao, Allah, Buddha, nature, our ancestors, to guide and instruct us, to keep us fed and nourished, our hearts on fire with passion, our minds alight with sacred wisdom for the work that is ours to do. That's why I think spirituality isn't just something to add on top of leftism to make it more effective. It's a fundamental cosmological shift that rewires us on a physiological, neurological, and cellular level. The reward for such a way of being is to live whilst in the body, something of nirvana, enlightenment, or heaven on earth. The biggest thing I hope people take from this video is that yes, we need a rebellion against oppressive systems, but also a rebellion against the pieces of the oppressor planted deep inside of us. To not only dare to take to the streets, but also dare to face our wounds and do the work of healing. To be guided by our minds and the intellect, but also follow the tug of our wise internal compass. To not only create our niche corner of the world, but to infuse politics into every aspect of our lives. To work in the material realm, but never forget the power of the spiritual. To absolutely be loud, ferocious, and angry, but also have the power to look within, feel within, listen within, welding our outward social political revolutions with deep inner reflection and the evolution of our consciousnesses. If you like this video, you may like my last video on politicizing spirituality. I'd love to hear in the comments section your relationship to the inner and outer world. If you want this channel to continue, you can support it via liking, subscribing, sharing, or becoming a patron. Thank you so much to those who offered their voices to this project. Thank you to Opt Out for editing, and thank you to my current patrons for helping me to birth into the world that which I think wants to be born through me. And I wish you all a beautiful day. Bye!